In early 1970s, before Apple, Steve Jobs was deeply into the spiritual exploration. Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Oregon at 1972 but dropped out after one semester. However, he continued auditing classes, one of which was calligraphy. So, which later inspired the beautiful typography and design focus in the first Macintosh computer. In 1974, Jobs traveled to India with his friend Dan Kotke to seek the spiritual enlightenment. They wanted to visit Neem Karoli Baba temple. So, a famous Hindu guru in Kanke, Uttarakhand. Unfortunately, Neem Karoli Baba had passed away before they arrived. Still, the journey deeply affected Jobs, but Jobs lived simply during his time in India, wearing a traditional clothes and walking a barefoot, fasting and studying Zen Buddhism and Hindu philosophy. He later said that his period taught him the value of intuition and the simplicity and the inner clarity, the values that later became the central to the Apple's design philosophy. It's interesting, right? Jobs adopted a minimalist mindset, clarity, focus, and removal of the unnecessary. When you look at the Apple products, it's really clean, perfect, intuitive design, absence of clutter. Yes, you can trace that directly back to his spiritual lesson in India and Zen. You have to trust that the dots will connect somehow in your future. Steve Jobs in Stanford commencement, he mentioned this word once in 2005. That's exactly what he was referring to, those spiritual dots from India, and he's searching for meaning.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
So even while he was exploring the spirituality, Jobs was also drawn to the technology and the electronics. In high school, Jobs met Steve Wozniak, an electronic genius. They bonded over building gadgets and pulling pranks like a blue box, a device that could make a free long distance phone call.
Things that Woz and I did was we built blue boxes. These are obsolete now, but they were devices that you could build. You know, when you make a long distance phone call in the background.
After returning from India, Jobs joined to the Atari, one of the earliest video game companies. He worked as a technician, helping develop games like a Breakout. Jobs wasn't a technical engineer. So, even Jobs wasn't a technical engineer himself, Wozniak often helped him with the hard parts. But Jobs had an incredible eye for what people would want and how the technology should feel. Jobs and Wozniak eventually decided to build and sell the personal computer. They started Apple Computer in 1976 in Jobs' garage. Wozniak was the builder, Jobs was the visionary and the salesman. Their goal was to make the computer and it is accessible and beautifully designed. Something that came directly from the Jobs' spiritual and the aesthetic sense. Before Apple became a global powerhouse, Jobs had already developed his unique brand of leadership. Even in the early 90s, Jobs had a rare ability to see what people didn't yet know they wanted. They came from his initiative and creative mindset, part spiritual, part aesthetic, part technical. He had an obsession with the detail and his simplicity inspired by the Zen aesthetics. For example, he once demanded that even the inside of the first Macintosh computer, which customer would never see, had to look beautiful. Jobs had an almost hypnotic charisma. He could convince the teams to achieve what they thought impossible. A leadership style that came from this deep belief in the power of focus and the conviction. In short, Steve Jobs, before Apple, was a curious seeker of meaning, beauty, and innovation. He wasn't just learning how to build machines, he was learning how to build experiences that touch the people's lives.